Hello and welcome to the Place North podcast. I'm Dan Whelan, Deputy Editor of Place Northwest. Today I am joined by Mackin and Mariel Rubinstein of the Eword. Over the next 40 minutes or so, we're going to be discussing how property marketing has changed over recent years and discussing what you need to know to make an effective marketing strategy in this year, 2025. Mariel, welcome to the pod.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
So before we get started, I think it would be a good idea to give people a bit of background on the Eword, specifically what you do, who you are, and what the E in the Eword is. So I will start with you. Give us a little breakdown of the Eword.
No worries. I started the business 20 years ago. We are a property digital strategy agency, which means we help property companies across the whole gamut of that sector generate leads and awareness. A lot of people ask about the E. It's actually very flexible. The E can be whatever you want it to be. So I'm just going to leave it there and leave it a bit of a mystery.
Open to interpretation.
Exactly.
Very good. Mariel, you're head of digital.
Yes.
Tell us what your role is and how long you've been with the business.
So I sort of work with our client teams to make sure we're delivering strategies that generate the goals that they want to do, which obviously a lot of the time is leads. And a big part of that is leading our discovery process. So we don't like to guess what the strategy is going to be. We like to make sure we're speaking to the right audience to understand how we should target them, what messaging relates to them. And so we like to host, various different touch points with them, whether that's focus groups, surveys, and that's a big part of how we set up strategies for new clients when we start working with them.
Fantastic. So 6 years you've been with the business.
Yes.
I don't think you could have foreseen how volatile and strange those 6 years would have been. We've had a pandemic, lots of economic volatility. The market has changed significantly, hasn't it? So let's get into talking about that first of all. So we know the market has shifted and demands have shifted and demographics have shifted, as I mentioned in the intro. But how has your role changed in terms of how you market properties to the people who are going to ultimately live in them? Mariel, we'll start with you.
I think one of the big changes is, 6 years ago, more so with the PBSA sector, but we see it in other sectors as well. There's one peak season where that's where all the demand is, and that's where we launch everything. That's definitely shifted over the years. So it's more of a year-round approach. So we know that buyers are under more pressure than ever when it comes to, finances with rising interest rates and etc. So they're taking much longer to make that decision. And that means that our campaigns need to adapt and be more always on and nurturing them through the different phases of that journey. So rather than just launching that one campaign at the right moment, it needs to be something that's happening all the time to constantly meet their needs and where they're at in that journey. So that's changed, the way we work and the way we operate strategies for our clients.
And in terms of your clients' expectations, because you might have a better handle on how the market has shifted compared to them, because they might be thinking, well, we've always done it this way. Why do we need to adapt? So are they along for the ride? Do they trust your judgment? Tell me a little bit about how that dynamic has changed.
It's really interesting. So I think the idea that BAU, campaigns that worked constantly, 7 or 8 years ago, the idea that still works now is gone. And stakeholders, budget holders, C-suite, they now know that. They've had enough quarters where they've seen the numbers not rolling in. So actually, I think we're in a phase where marketers and stakeholders are aligned in terms of experimentation and trying new things, new channels, new approaches, and everyone believes that's the only way to move forwards.
I'm going to give you an insight into my sort of first-hand experience of property marketing, and you can tell me whether this is pre-2019 or post-2019. So I recently bought a house, and the estate agent and many estate agents, I think, that what they do is they get their iPhone and they go around the house and they show you the rooms and they tell you that it's good, it's close to good local schooling, it's 3 bedrooms, south-facing garden, etc., etc. And that works for me because I saw a house on there and I bought it. But that seems overly simplistic. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, if you think about the buying funnel, so all the stages that you went through when you're thinking about buying a house, and it's the same for leasing, it's the same for PBSA, there are lots of steps, and it starts with you coming to the realization that you could, if you wanted to, move house or rent somewhere else. And that is a step in the buying process, and that's a step that you can target. The way you target those individuals is fundamentally different to people who have an agreement in principle. they are close to making a decision, and you want to be part of that mix. So sometimes you get buyers who drop in super quick, make a quick decision. The majority of buyers, especially nowadays, are taking longer in that buying funnel to move between the steps. There's uncertainty. They're a little bit nervous about moving forwards, and you have to support them in that funnel more than you used to.
So more of a slow burn these days to get those deals over the line.
Yeah, it's hand-holding, supporting. It's being the brand or the operator that is there to guide them. The hard sell can work right at the end. X number of units left, we've got these offers on, whatever it is. But, before that, you really need to be the brand where people feel like you are speaking to them and where they're at. They're not sure about how a mortgage works. They're concerned about, moving in and the process. If you can be the brand that supports them, then you'll be the option that they love and likely to choose.
Okay, that's interesting. So we'll get into a little bit later on about what an effective marketing strategy looks like. But I want to talk a little bit more about the shifting sort of demands and desires of residents. Because Mariel, you mentioned before about interest rates. That's one thing that's changing, making people more cautious, makes the process a bit slower. How else have expectations changed in terms of what residents want now compared to 3, 5, 10 years ago?
I think obviously COVID was a big one as well, not just obviously like financially that affected a lot of people, but in terms of what people wanted. I think if you cast yourself back to 2020, that desire for outdoor space, being out of the cities, that was a big shift in what people wanted there. And now we're slowly seeing that shift back. So people are going back into the office. They're not working from home as much. So maybe their locations aren't quite right anymore. So I think things like that change. But I think even within that, when you look at different audience segments, first-time buyers are going to want very different things compared to a downsizer or a family that's trying to look for a home. So I think all your campaigns, you need to get into the head of who is that person? What do they care about right now? That might be different from, 5 years ago. And we need to make sure that even across a year that they're looking, what do they care and look at in each of those stages?
Yeah, and so who will the winners be then? In terms of I've got two developers, they've both developed an apartment building, similar spec, and it comes down to the marketing strategy. Who's going to win and how are they going to win?
The most flexible, most agile developer will win. The developer who's willing to invest in some of the key technologies that developers should have, but often don't. A good CRM, the ability to deploy marketing automation is also critical, but often rare with developers and developers who are willing to be, I'm going to say, brave. The advertising doesn't need to be risky or outrageous, but they need to be comfortable moving away from, the kind of BAU core type of marketing and doing things that are different. And also developers who are willing to invest in understanding the audience. There is a cost attached to that, and sometimes you feel like you want to spend that money on the advertising itself, but often you can improve the performance of the advertising by investing earlier on in understanding the audience, surveys, market research. I was looking at numbers the other day, PBSA sector versus resi sector. Both sectors are struggling with a rising average cost per click. So it can be 60-70% higher to pay for someone to visit your website from channels like Google Ads, Meta, TikTok than it was.
So is this cost of acquisition of a customer effectively?
Effectively, yeah. So you've got two elements. You've got your average cost per click. So you go onto Meta, you click on an ad, that is effectively costing the advertiser for your click. And then on the other side of that, you've got the conversion rate from click to lead. So what we're seeing with Resi is the average cost per clicks are going up. The average conversion rate is going down. And that's how you calculate your cost per lead. So on a Google search over the last 12 months versus the previous, you're looking at a cost per lead that's gone up over 2.5 times.
Right.
Now, if you look at PBSA, which we see as being a little bit more agile, they still have challenges around their marketing and restrictions, but more agile in decision making, then they have the same CPC increase, but their conversion rates have doubled over the last 12 months on average across the sites that we manage. And I put that down to the fact that they're investing in technology, they've got some level of marketing automation, a CRM in the background, and also are just a bit, there's less latency when it comes to customer experience feedback as well.
That's very interesting, because you would expect maybe the reverse, because PBSA, you would expect to be less flexible because they have this very real hard deadline for filling the buildings, right? You know, term starts in September, they need to be in by then, but maybe they've recognized that and then adapted their ways and become more flexible as a result.
It's definitely that cycle puts a lot more pressure on. You know, there is absolute pressure in resi. You want to get out that scheme and move on to the next one. But in PBSA, that cycle repeats and repeats, and you're used to it. And that pressure means that they need to look every year and go, what do we do better? How do we make that booking process easier?
What deadline focuses the mind maybe a bit more.
Exactly, yeah. So if you look at resi, a lot of the time, the form you fill in to say you want a viewing or you want to download a brochure, that form will be unchanged from 4 or 5 years ago.
Right.
It's the same form, and yet it is the gatekeeper to that visitor becoming a lead. And what you should be doing is looking at that form and going, how do we make this more efficient? How do we stop people disappearing at this stage, which a high percentage of people often do?
Brilliant. So let's move on. We're going to talk about how to sell out a development in 2025. What works, what doesn't. So first of all, let's talk about digital. It's already come up a couple of times already. Moving away from the offline stuff, embracing digital. Mariel, digital as the default. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so I think with digital, like I said previously, there used to be, it's something people dabbled in, but perhaps it's only in certain periods where demand's higher. That's when it would be taken advantage of. Whereas, you know, that's not the way that the property companies can operate anymore. There needs to be a always on digital approach. And that doesn't mean running the same campaign all the way year round. It means having various different strategies depending on where people are in the buying journey at different times. So I think alongside that, it's looking at your audience and having separate campaigns for different segments. So one type of ad group or messaging is going to work really well for that audience, but it needs to have a different sort of campaign targeting someone else with different key points and messaging.
Okay, can you dive into that a little bit, just to give us an example of, you know, firstly, you know, what does digital marketing look like, and how might you vary those approaches depending on the market you're trying to tap into?
Yeah, so I think, you know, you obviously have the traditional funnel, which applies for digital as well. You've got the awareness, consideration and acquisition phase. So you need to be having campaigns that are different in those different stages, and people will be in different stages at different times of the year. So although there is somewhat of a cycle in resi and more so in PBSA, where it kind of is seasonal, but some people might be ready to book or to buy earlier on than other people. So you need to have campaigns that accommodate for that at different stages of time. And different channels will be better at different parts of those stages. So for example, in the awareness stage, you're focusing on channels that are going to drive high quality traffic to your website. You're not necessarily focusing on getting those leads initially. And channels that are sending traffic to your website that are cheaper are almost better in those stages. So paid socials, whether that's Meta, TikTok, they can be, or Google Display, they can be more effective at getting people to the website who are still relevant, are still, you know, interested in property, potentially moving, but then you're getting them to the website where they can learn a bit more about you. I think that's then when retargeting and your core lead campaigns come in, which again are going to focus on slightly different things, but they know that now you've reached people who are already kind of interested, a bit warmed up, and that's where you start to tweak your messaging and that journey as it goes on.
Fascinating insight. How do you go about, explain it to me like I'm a child who has no understanding of this at all. So how do you make sure that your ads or your marketing is going to the right people? Just give us a little peek behind the curtain there in terms of how that works.
So obviously, you right at the beginning of your strategy, you know, you've got buyer personas. They're the types of people you want to target. Within each channel, you can target those people in different ways. So, for example, Google search, that is more of a high intent channel because people are actively searching in Google. This is what they want. This is what they're looking for. So it's about getting in the minds of what type of searches they would put there. So if they're looking for properties in Manchester, you know, typical searches would be, you know, 3-bedroom home Manchester, but going beyond that, you can add on sort of extra layers to that targeting. So we might know that a certain audience, perhaps it's more people who need to be more affluent, who can afford that product. So overlaying certain interests that we would associate with our audience, just to make sure that we are more targeted with who we're reaching, not just reaching every single person who's searching for a 3-bedroom home. I think there's a balance between having a wide enough pool and casting that net wide enough, because if you go too niche, you will increase your costs. But at the same time, still making sure that you're targeting the relevant subset of that audience and not going too broad that you're just driving lower quality traffic to your website.
Really interesting. And what about, so let's say someone doesn't live in Manchester, but they've heard Manchester's a good place to live and there's a buzz around Manchester and they'd like a piece of the action. They might search something like good places to live in Manchester, right? So how would you make sure that the asset that you're marketing appears in that particular search?
Yeah, so I think that's definitely, going back to the funnel, that's more in the earlier awareness research phases, which are really important because, you've got to nurture and help them make that decision and then end up with, you're the right place for them to buy. So there's different ways. Obviously, you can still bid on those terms when it comes to search, but they're not as high intent, so then less likely to convert perhaps at that point.
Okay.
So that is still something you can look at, but you also have different parts of your digital strategy. So that's also when sort of SEO can come into it. So making sure that your website is updated with regular content that gives information about those searches. So if someone's searching the best places to live in Manchester, making sure that you have content on your site which has articles about the best areas and tapping into that, so they can then take the next step in their journey and research more of that. So then they become aware of you as a brand. They're not quite ready to convert yet, but one, you've got them to your website so you can retarget them, but also you've been helpful and educated them in that decision. So that's always going to be a nice brand interaction.
Let's go to that point, retargeting, lead nurturing. This is the next point on our effective property marketing strategy for 2025, not flags on a roundabout. The importance of lead nurturing and retargeting. So we mentioned earlier about it being a bit more of a slow burn these days. So Al, tell us about that element of the strategy.
Yeah, two very important facets of a strategy, but also very different. So retargeting is the ability to show adverts to people who've been on your site before. Basic level of retargeting is you visited a site, we will show you this advert, and everyone gets the same ad. More advanced is, okay, we know what pages you've looked at. We can start to make some informed guesses as to what you're interested in, and therefore you will see different adverts based on what you've looked at. Often cost effective, really powerful because you are preaching to the almost converted. And we see schemes where this is providing 60-70% of the leads. So we have campaigns that work in the earlier part of the funnel. They bring people in, they generate awareness, and then it's the retargeting that does the heavy lifting. So really important that you get that right. You can do retargeting on Google display, Facebook, and other channels as well.
I'm interested to hear you say that works, because when I see the same ads popping up over and over again, I just get annoyed.
Yeah.
But it works for some people.
It does, yeah, because if you think about a normal advert, we're showing it to people where we're expecting a small percentage of them to be primed and ready to move forwards. But with retargeting, the percentage of people who are active in market is much, much higher. And especially in your line of work, you'll be getting a lot of property ads all the time. But for most other people, it's a reminder. People forget. You research, you see a development that you think is going to be great. You go do something else. You've forgotten the name of that development or the developer itself. So it's a way to remind people. It's really effective. And then lead nurturing it's basically the automation of what a brilliant salesperson would do. So if you have an amazing salesperson who never sleeps, who has 50 hands and 20 laptops, what would they do all the time? They would be gently nurturing the leads, understanding what stage people are at, not hard selling, but trying to move people through that buying process. And marketing automation isn't expensive. The platforms can be super cheap. But all they're doing is you are setting out a set of rules on how you would want to nurture someone, and they are following the rules for each individual. So you land as a lead, you go down a certain workflow and cadence of emails or SMS.
Okay.
that sort of drive you forwards. It should be informative, should be hand-holding, shouldn't be hard sell, but should sell, the development, the amenities, and the developer itself.
The next point we're going to talk about is, I'm quite interested in this, 2025 digital channel mix. So we're talking there about, the different avenues that you can go down. I want to talk about TikTok. It was mentioned briefly before. I'm not personally on TikTok, but I appreciate its power. And that's probably why I avoid it. But tell me a bit, Mariel, about the channel mix, and I guess it depends on the development, on who you're targeting, about what channels that you use. Give us a bit of an overview on that.
Yeah, I think there's obviously the sort of core channels in the digital mix, which most people are comfortable with using. So Meta, which is obviously across Facebook and Instagram, and then Google as well. But like you said, there are other channels on the periphery that are also important to test and trial within that mix. And TikTok is definitely one of those. I think over the years, we've experienced it's common to get pushed back, particularly more from C-suite of property companies, because the perception, maybe less so now, but used to be certainly, is it's just 18-year-olds, they're just doing dances. Why on earth would I put ads on that? It's just a waste of money.
18-year-old dancers need places to live and work.
Exactly. But actually, if you look at who's actually on that app, there is a significant proportion of, late 20s to mid 30s to up to kind of early 40s who are still a very engaged audience, and I think TikTok is actually one of the more engaged channels compared to how much time people spend per use on the other main social ones. So for example, in comparison to Instagram, it really does have that more, you're absorbed. I mean, I could spend hours on there. You get in a tunnel, and that's a good thing when it comes to the marketing, because it means you've got their full attention. And you can really hit home that message. So it's definitely a channel that property marketers should be using, because the audience is there. It just needs to be used in a different way.
Yeah, I guess the perception maybe from the C-suite clients that you have is that, these 18-year-olds, the younger people who use TikTok, they don't have the disposable income
Exactly.
in order to be buying somewhere or necessarily paying the rents in these high-end apartments. But that's, a lot of these people on there are influencers or influencer adjacent, quite well paid. It's an interesting dynamic, isn't it? How are you going about convincing your clients that TikTok is something that should be explored? Are you just showing them the data?
Can I just jump in, because I've got a really good example,
Please, yeah.
of TikTok. So we are marketing, almost at the end of marketing a scheme, which is, I think it's about 50 units. It's homes, it's family homes, 3, 4, 5 bedrooms. It's in a part of the UK where it's not a city. It's a beautiful development, but it's where you go to when you're kind of late 30s, 40s, 50s. And we tested TikTok with that, and it's done incredibly well.
Wow.
We thought the best we could hope for with this is it would be awareness, valuable awareness that then we retargeted or just got through another channel. It's a lead generation channel for us. It's also given us a wealth of data that's helped us in our other campaigns, and we did not expect that. And that is a really powerful way to show stakeholders, C-suite, that this channel is genuine and useful to you, which is leads and lead volume.
Moving on then to talk a little bit about the data. You mentioned there that you get a great deal of data from using TikTok and other social media as well. How do you use that? Because data's all well and good, but you need to be able to unpick it and use it. And to tell me a bit about that, because data's a bit of a dark art, isn't it?
It shouldn't be. So I use this example a lot. One of our bigger resi clients, we meet every 2 weeks internally. Just our team, all hands, everyone involved in that account, and we look at 2 metrics, which is the volume of leads and the cost per lead. And when we tell clients that, they're often really surprised, because they're used to seeing reports that started out with 2 pages and 30 metrics and have expanded to 10 pages and hundreds of metrics, and people get really excited about all of this data. That is our starting point with that client every 2 weeks to understand performance, volume of leads and cost per lead. If we see issues or we see significant overperformance, we dig in, we pull out more data. But that's the way I think most property businesses should work, is trim down your metrics.
Keep it simple.
Keep it simple and focus on the metrics that are critical. The most important thing for you is we get enough leads and that's brought in at an efficient price. The other side of data is the data that you've got correct. People rarely do data audits. They rely on the fact that a lead that they've tracked, which is a conversion, it was accurate 5 years ago and is accurate today. And often that's not the case. So it's really critical that the data you rely on, lead volume and your cost per lead, is wholly accurate.
That's interesting. And Mariel, we should go back actually and talk a bit more about the digital channel mix, because I'm conscious that we only spoke about TikTok there, but how do the other ones work? Is there any of the social media channels now that are kind of dying a death in terms of their effectiveness in this space?
Good question. I mean, Twitter ads have died a death. Well, it's not Twitter anymore, X.
Yes, to give it its, yeah.
I wouldn't recommend that to people these days.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
But I think there's other channels that can still be tapped into. So, for example, Spotify, that's something we've tested a few times over the last couple of years. So again, that's more upper funnel and it's tying into that awareness piece.
How would you use that? That's audio ads, I'm guessing.
Yeah, so on the free versions of Spotify, you obviously get ads in between what you're listening to. It's a similar sort of self-serve ads platform as you would with Meta. And you can target audiences based on kind of real-time listening. So if, for example, taking the student audience as an example, we wanted to target them. So we targeted people listening to study podcasts during exam season, because chances are with that age range, that's likely to be students. So you can target them with the right messaging in that moment.
They're distracting the students from their revision.
For good reason. But you can also target, by interest, those certain fan bases of certain artists or different podcast interests, things like that. So that's a really interesting one, which obviously is upper funnel, so it's not necessarily going to be driving you direct leads, but it's about that brand awareness and getting them to know who you are before they're making that decision.
Yeah. And what about Facebook then? Or that's part of the Meta family.
Yeah.
Is that as effective? Because what we find interaction with our articles, for example, it's very different who's using that to who's using Instagram, for example, even though they're part of the same family. So does that still have a role to play?
Definitely. I think obviously different age groups are more active on Facebook. With the student audience, we find that Facebook is where the parents are on, so we can apportion more spend towards Facebook versus Instagram for that segment, because that's where we know they spend their time rather than Instagram, whereas students are more active on Instagram and we see a lower kind of cost per lead, cost per click when it's on specifically Instagram placements. So it depends on the age group, but it definitely has its place. I know everyone says, who goes on Facebook anymore, but there's a
lot of people still do.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. We spoke at the beginning about how much the market has shifted over the last sort of 5 years. So how do we protect our marketing strategies from future volatility? Because there's no saying that the next 5 years are going to be any less volatile than the last 5 years, as depressing as that is and as scary as that is. So let's talk a bit about future-proofing your strategy. How do you do that? We'll start with you, Mariel, and we come on to you, Al, as well.
Yeah, I think what the last few years have told us is, you can't look at last year and go, well, this happened in this month, therefore we should expect that this month. You have to be prepared for the unknown, which is obviously a very tricky thing. So I think one of the most important things is making sure you're constantly testing what's working, what's not working. Because if you're in a moment where your current campaign isn't quite working because something's changed, whatever that might be, you've got your toolkit where okay, well, this is plan B because this has worked quite effectively for us in the past. And I think there's always moments like that to be prepared for. For example, TikTok went down earlier this year in the US. That affected some of the clients we work with. So what are we going to do if that just ends? Obviously, it did come back. But same with Facebook, we see that disabling people's ad accounts for no good reason, and it's really difficult to get them back. So you're starting from zero again. So being able to diversify and knowing what else works for you is really important. You don't just want to focus on, your top 2 channels forever, because if they disappear, then what are you going to do? And you're not prepared for that change.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And Al, before I get your thoughts on that, I want to put a scenario to you, if you don't mind. So PBSA, obviously very reliant on foreign students to fill those buildings. What happens if, there's some macroeconomic event and the taps turn off and you don't have access to that market anymore? How do you then respond? Because your clients at that point would be panicking, wouldn't they? How would you then pivot and respond to make sure that you can still get people in those buildings?
It's a real situation. It happens multiple times a year. I think obviously we've got the challenges between certain countries and China. We had an issue last year with Australia, which we weren't as aware of over here, but obviously the Australian market was impacted by the sort of issues between the Australian government and the Chinese government. As marketers, it is our job to get those leads, so we need to find an alternative. And if there is a segment of the market that isn't as active, then we move funds to another segment. Sometimes it's a good opportunity to go back to basics and say, okay, when did we last do a big strategy refresh? Was it, 2 years ago? Let's go back into the market and let's see, what's changed. And it also has to be supported by the asset owners as well. They're not oblivious to significant changes and how that is going to impact them, and also how they might need to take a haircut for a year. And it turns out that actually, that Chinese market came back into play. Probably a year, 18 months after the issues started. So it's really about everyone working together, but we can't just put up our hands and say, okay, we'll hibernate for a season. If you just wouldn't mind sitting on the empty asset for a while, our job is to get in and work out, okay, well, which group is next? Yeah. How do we make this stronger? Which competitors can we go after? Which parts of the country do we see are a little bit softer, and we can get in there and make a difference.
All goes back to that, what Mariel said about having a plan B, doesn't it? Do you have any final thoughts on how to future-proof a strategy? You set up the business 20 years ago. You must have, some experience in, well, you're still here, so it shows that you've been effective in future-proofing to an extent. So
I'm going to take a slightly different approach with marketing and future-proofing, which is to use marketing as a source of information for the wider business. So, for example, you might have a scheme that you're struggling to sell, and you feel that you know what the issue is. Maybe when you put it into planning 5 years ago, the world was very different. The pricing is just not right, or the facilities aren't right. And your marketing is effectively telling you that. So you're pushing really hard on the marketing, you're getting a certain response, and it's not at the level that you need. I think you can take a lot of useful data from the ads that you put out from the website, and then use that data to validate the things that you think might be true. So it's really future-proofing your wider strategy through, taking data from marketing and seeing the value in it.
Yeah, so learning from things that maybe weren't quite as effective as you might have hoped that they would be.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And certainly from a competitive basis as well, we do lots of competitor analysis for our clients, sometimes monthly, but usually quarterly. What are the competitors saying in the ads? What's active in the market in terms of size and cost and incentives, or I should say offers. And that can be very useful as well. And I think all that information can really help people make the bigger decisions around discounting or even changing the tenure of schemes.
Fantastic. Now, to end, there are other property marketing agencies out there, as we know. We're happy to have you guys in the studio today. So this is your chance now to sort of give a bit of a pitch. Why the Eword?
So we've obviously been working in the property sector for a long time. We love to win awards. We like to create beautiful creatives and ads. The thing that really drives us is leads. And there's a very simple reason for that, which is happy clients stay with us longer. How do we make our clients happy? We generate the leads and the lead volume that they need. So I think that's a really important part of why people choose us. I think we speak their language. We understand the pain points, and we're also really focused on truly understanding the buyers. Who are they? What do they care about? How do we tap into their emotions and get them to see our clients' assets and properties as being their number one choice?
Fantastic. Mariel?
Yeah, I think as well we work more as an extension of our clients' teams. So we see it as a partnership rather than the traditional client-agency relationship. And I think that's what makes what they get from us so effective because we are so ingrained in their businesses. We understand, like you said, the pain points, but we understand what stakeholders want and what they need when they need it. And that allows the way we work to be more effective, not just driving the results that they need, but also, the reports they need when they need it, and managing those conversations that they have to have, day to day. So it goes beyond just driving the sales. It's how we work together.
Always on.
Yeah.
Always on. So let's just recap then that effective digital marketing strategy to sell out developments in 2025. Embrace digital. Don't ignore the importance of lead nurturing and retargeting. Embrace TikTok, and other channels are available. Metrics and reporting. Pick the right data. Don't bombard people with data, and take steps to future-proof your strategy. A huge thank you to Al and Mariel for joining me today and sharing their expertise. If you want to learn more about the Eword, go to theeword.co.uk. I hope you can join us again for another episode of the Place North podcast.